Ernest Borgnine was not just another Hollywood actor, he was a force of nature. Born Ernest Borgnine in 1917 to Italian immigrant parents, his story began humbly in Connecticut. His rise to stardom was marked by grit, hard work, and an unusual mix of toughness and warmth. Before ever stepping onto a film set, Borgnine served in the U.S. Navy for 10 years, from 1935 to 1945. That experience shaped the stern but deeply human characters he would later bring to the screen. When he won the Academy Award for Marty in 1955, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him. Here was a man who didn't look like the typical matinee idol, round-faced, gap-toothed, with the physique of a dock worker. Yet he delivered one of the most tender, heartbreaking performances ever captured on film. Critics hailed him as the embodiment of working-class America, a symbol of honesty and integrity. Behind that rugged smile, however, there was also a fierce pride and a short temper. Borgnine was not one to easily forgive an insult, especially if it came from a fellow actor he respected. Hollywood during his prime was an ecosystem driven by ego, rivalry, and fragile friendships. Borgnine was both admired and feared. He could be generous and jovial, then turn icy and unapproachable within seconds if he felt disrespected. Over his long career, spanning more than 6 decades, he worked with dozens of stars, from Bette Davis to Kirk Douglas, from Frank Sinatra to Lee Marvin. But among them, there was one co-star who would earn his permanent contempt, someone who crossed an invisible line that Borgnine never forgot. The story began during the filming of The Dirty Dozen in 1966, one of the defining war movies of the decade. Directed by Robert Aldrich, the film featured an ensemble cast of Hollywood's toughest men: Lee Marvin, Charles Bronson, Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, and, of course, Ernest Borgnine. It was a testosterone-fueled project with real military advisors on set, grueling physical training, and long shooting days under the hot British sun. Borgnine played Major General Worden, the commanding officer who assigns Marvin's ragtag group of military prisoners their suicidal mission. It wasn't a physically demanding role, but it required authority, something Borgnine naturally exuded. On set, though, he quickly noticed tension building between himself and another actor, one who refused to acknowledge the discipline of hierarchy, even in fiction. That actor was Lee Marvin, a man equally proud, equally scarred by his real-life service in World War II. Marvin was charismatic, but notoriously difficult. He drank heavily, mocked authority, and loved to provoke. Borgnine, who valued order and mutual respect, found Marvin's attitude infuriating. During breaks, Marvin would joke about Hollywood soldiers, implying that Borgnine's Navy background didn't make him a real fighter. Borgnine laughed at first, but after days of similar remarks, the laughter turned cold. Crew members later recalled seeing Borgnine storm off set more than once. In interviews decades later, he never mentioned Marvin by name, but hinted that one actor behaved like a spoiled brat and that he never forgave him. Hollywood insiders, however, had no doubt who he meant. Borgnine and Marvin's clash became legendary, a silent battle of wills between two veterans of both war and film. The director, Robert Aldrich, had to separate them more than once. He reportedly told the assistant director, "If those two ever come to blows, I'm rolling camera. It'll be the most authentic thing in the movie." The fight never happened, but the hostility lingered. Borgnine, a man of principle, believed Marvin had disrespected not just him, but the military code they both once served under. To Borgnine, that was unforgivable. In the years following The Dirty Dozen, both men's careers soared. Marvin became an icon of 1960s anti-hero cool, starring in Point Blank and Cat Ballou. Borgnine continued to work steadily, appearing in films like The Wild Bunch and the TV hit McHale's Navy. But behind his trademark grin, Borgnine carried a quiet resentment. When asked in interviews which actors he'd most enjoyed working with, he always had warm words for William Holden, Burt Lancaster, and even Bette Davis. But he never once mentioned Marvin. In 1972, a Hollywood reporter asked Borgnine about his rumored feud with Marvin. His response was measured but firm. "There are people in this business who mistake arrogance for talent. I've met a few. I choose to remember the ones who respect their work and their fellow actors." It was as close as he ever came to naming names. Over time, the story faded into Hollywood folklore, but Borgnine's bitterness never did. When Marvin died in 1987, tributes poured in from across the industry. Borgnine, however, remained silent. In private, he was said to have told a friend, "I hope he found peace, because he never gave it to anyone else." The remark, though harsh, revealed something deeper: Borgnine's unyielding sense of justice. He believed in decency, in keeping one's word, and in treating colleagues as comrades, not competitors. For a man who prided himself on forgiveness, a value deeply tied to his Catholic upbringing, Borgnine's inability to forgive Marvin was an exception. To those who knew him best, that silence said everything. It wasn't just about a clash of egos, it was about honor. Marvin had, in Borgnine's eyes, crossed an unspoken boundary, one that no apology could mend. To understand why Ernest Borgnine never forgave Lee Marvin, one must understand Borgnine's personal code. He was not a man who tolerated betrayal, disrespect, or hypocrisy. For him, the film industry was a workplace, not a playground for inflated egos. His years in the Navy had ingrained in him an unwavering sense of discipline. To Borgnine, every man on set was part of a crew, and every film was a mission that demanded unity. He often said, "When I work, I give 100%. I expect the same from the guy next to me." Those who didn't share that attitude rarely lasted long in his good graces. Many younger actors who came up in the 1970s and 1980s, such as Robert Duvall and Gene Hackman, spoke about Borgnine's professional rigor. He would arrive early, memorize every line, and treat the lighting crew with the same respect as the director. He was old school and proud of it. But Lee Marvin represented something Borgnine despised: the new Hollywood rebel. Marvin didn't rehearse much. He improvised, broke script, and refused to follow direction if it didn't feel real. To Borgnine, that wasn't creativity. It was laziness disguised as genius. Their clash was as much philosophical as personal. Two different visions of what it meant to be an actor, two different generations fighting for the soul of cinema. Friends said that even decades later, Borgnine would mention that movie when talking about his worst experiences on set. He would laugh, change the subject, and yet his tone would tighten. The bitterness, however faint, still lived in his voice. It wasn't about revenge or rivalry. It was about integrity. "You can forgive a man who makes a mistake," he once said. "But how do you forgive a man who mocks everything you stand for?" As the years passed, Borgnine mellowed in some ways, but remained stubborn in others. He continued working well into his 90s, a testament to his endurance and love for his craft. Younger filmmakers adored him. He became a grandfatherly figure on sets, offering advice to newcomers, telling war stories, and sharing jokes between takes. But when asked about grudges, he was surprisingly candid. In a 2006 interview celebrating his 60th year in Hollywood, Borgnine said, "There's one man I never patched things up with. We just didn't see eye to eye. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was something deeper. I never went looking for his apology, and he never came for mine." He didn't need to name the man. Everyone knew. The decades-old tension between him and Marvin had become part of Hollywood mythology, retold in memoirs, biographies, and fan circles. Some journalists tried to reframe the story, suggesting that Marvin's teasing was misunderstood or that the feud was exaggerated. But Borgnine's own words hinted otherwise. He once explained, "I don't hold grudges lightly. If you betray trust, it's not about anger. It's about disappointment. You can't rebuild that." To the public, he was a smiling, avuncular figure, the veteran actor who had seen it all. To those close to him, however, Borgnine carried a quiet loneliness. His fifth wife, Tova Tres-Nace, said in one interview, "Ernie forgave almost everyone, but there was one person he never wanted to talk about. It hurt him more than he admitted. Even late in life, he refused to attend retrospectives of The Dirty Dozen. While he praised the film's direction and script, he avoided discussing its cast dynamics. When asked why, he simply replied, 'Some memories are best left on the battlefield.'" The irony is that Borgnine and Marvin were, in many ways, mirror images. Both were veterans, both products of a rough upbringing, and both found salvation in acting. They embodied masculinity in an age that worshipped toughness. Yet their philosophies diverged. Marvin embraced chaos while Borgnine sought order. Where Marvin relied on instinct, Borgnine valued preparation. Both men commanded respect, but neither could respect the other. Their feud was not one of shouting matches or public scandals. It was a cold war of silence and pride, and that perhaps made it even more tragic. Hollywood history is filled with rivalries. Davis and Crawford, Hoffman and Beatty, Ford and Wayne, but few were as quietly venomous as this one. Their paths crossed again only once, at an awards ceremony in the late 1970s. Borgnine nodded politely. Marvin barely responded. The air between them was heavy with unspoken years. Film historians often debate whether their mutual disdain may have elevated the Dirty Dozen itself. The tension on screen, Marvin's rebellious defiance against Borgnine's military authority, crackled with authenticity. The audience felt it, even if they didn't know the source. Director Aldrich reportedly said after the film wrapped, "If they ever made peace, it would ruin the realism of the picture." Today, their legacies are intertwined. Marvin remains the poster child for cinematic rebellion. Borgnine, the champion of discipline and humanity. One represented the storm, the other the anchor. Together, they captured an era when Hollywood men were both soldiers and poets, fighting their wars on screen and off.